Thanks everybody for being with us today for our almost our 50th community conservation conversation from Zoo Advisors. We've been doing this for more than 2 years now, and it's really great to see so many participants. Some of you have been with us since the beginning, and some are new faces, which I really appreciate. This is Gaining Impact, Resources, and Awareness for Conservation. And we're going to spend the next hour talking about, with our panel and with everybody else in the room, about how we can gain greater awareness and recognition for our work in conservation, and equally as important, if not more, how we can identify some funding sources for the important work we do. Maybe some things that might be a little surprising, not on your normal radar. So we're going to get started. I will, first of all, thank David Walsh, our president and CEO. Hey, David. Manning the controls for me this morning, and my colleague, Lori Perkins. I think Eric Miller is also with us this morning. Wanted to just introduce our focus. We are going to talk primarily about conservation in all its glory, not necessarily limited to a narrow slice or your programs, but talk more broadly about what we're hearing and what we're seeing. And I'd also like to thank the Fundación Temaikèn family, I feel like your family almost, for starting us off on this journey. Several months ago, we started working with them, and we recognized what a terrific conservation program they have and great facilities. And we started talking about how we could work together to gain, first of all, a little bit broader awareness outside of Buenos Aires, outside of Argentina, outside of South America, perhaps, with colleagues, peers, and also identify some new funding sources. And we thought, well, gee, that's going to be of interest to everybody. So we're going to spend the next hour together digging into some of these ideas. And I will ask you, we'll try to monitor hand raises, but if you want to raise a hand, ask a question at any point, we'll spend the first half hour with the panel in some moderated question and answer, and then we'll open it up for broad-based discussion. But please feel free to put a question in the chat at any point. So just to introduce everybody, you can wave your hand and then we'll start calling on you. In no order, Karen Burns from Indianapolis Zoo. Thanks again, Karen. As long as we're in the city in Indianapolis, say hi to Bill Street, Indianapolis. Lynn Mento, still East Coast here, Conservation Nation. Thank you, Lynn. How about Julie Rogue from New Mexico Biopark? Let's go further west. And I think we have Clay Meredith too from the Red List at Albuquerque Biopark. Thanks a lot, Clay. Judy Mann-Lang, South Africa, thank you. And from, I don't think I missed anybody on the panel there, from Fundación Temaikèn, we have Dario. I saw Dario, I thought. Connie, Paula, Chiquilla, and Christian Gillette. So thank you all for joining us. And let's dive in. I have no particular order, but I do have some questions. Just let's start off with a little softball about gaining awareness for your work, and then we'll dive into the funding and resources. I'm just interested in what avenues, maybe some surprising, that you found for gaining greater public awareness or even awareness among your peers of your program, sort of outside of AZA or WAZA. What have you gone to? And I'm gonna zero in on Karen, because if there's one thing that has gained awareness around conservation and the role that zoos can play, I think it's a lot of the work that Indianapolis has done, Bill's as well, but the Indianapolis Prize certainly has gained awareness. Karen, I'm gonna jump in. I'm sorry to kind of nail you like that.
No, that's fine, that's fine. The Indianapolis Prize was created in 2004, and we held it for the first time in 2006. And the premise behind the Indianapolis Prize really started out as, how can we bring the same sort of attention and hero making public relations to conservation that in our city we see reserved for sports. And that was sort of that question, is how can we turn that international spotlight onto the heroes of animal conservation? And that was the premise behind the Indianapolis Prize. So the prize from the beginning was structured to not only put significant resources to use for conservation, but it was also structured to draw attention to conservation. And it has done that pretty effectively. Currently, the prize awards $250,000 as unrestricted grant to an individual who's made a significant contribution to animal conservation, $50,000 to the finalists, the 5 finalists for that award. In addition, we award money to an organization backed by a celebrity, and that gets into this hero making part of the prize. It's a $25,000 unrestricted grant to the organization of their choosing. And then we recently launched another award to recognize an emerging conservationist under the age of 40, and that receives a $50,000 somewhat restricted cash grant. So it's held every other year. It has a significant amount. The size of the awards has a lot to do with the amount of attention that it receives, the types of awards. For example, some of the people we've honored as the celebrities have been Harrison Ford for his work with Conservation International and orangutans, Sigourney Weaver for her work with Diane Fossey. So we very deliberately targeted the people who had a much larger platform and pulpit than we did to carry that message. Our goal is to reach people who are not thinking about conservation currently and convince them that it may be the most important thing they haven't thought of yet. So that is part of how the event is structured, or the program is structured, to hit both of those buckets. We also work pretty extensively to draw new resources in through our vehicle to conservationists. So we publish a gift giving guide that is structured almost like the Heifer International Guide, where we put the programs out there and the money funnels directly to them. And so we're using this increasingly broad platform to pull people and dollars into our arena that haven't been there before. And so a big piece of what worked for us for gaining the initial money had to do with the nature of the award and being a placemaking endeavor for Indianapolis. It was a deliberate attempt for this city to take a leadership position in conservation. And so that crossed over from traditional conservation funding sources into community building money and economic development money. And that sort of set the stage for, and now I'm going to push it over to my colleague, Bill Street. We created, because of the prize and the fact that it cut across all species and programs, we were able to gain international connections and international recognition. We now have relationships with conservationists who are leading in their field that we did not have when we started almost 20 years ago. And that set the stage for the rest of our conservation programming at the zoo to move forward. And so if I can, Kathy, not to control your agenda, turn it over to Bill, that connection to the work he's doing right now.
Thanks. Go ahead, Bill.
Sure. So thank you, Karen. There's no doubt that because of the prize, it opened up opportunities for us here at the zoo that may not have been opportunities that we would have had without the prize. A few years ago, we sat down with the Species Survival Commission of IUCN, and we identified what it would take if we were to make an investment in conservation. What were the greatest needs? So obviously, many of our zoos, we commit dollars to conservation. But what they really needed was the ability to improve their capacity to assess species, to create international conservation plans, and to implement those plans. And that network of close to 11,000 conservationists needed support, not quite administrative support, but support from conservationists in their own right to be able to help them through that conservation cycle process. And so we formed I think the largest partnership with the Species Survival Commission that's been created, at least between a zoo. And we have brought on a series of taxonomic and realm-based coordinators that focus specifically on the specialist groups within the Species Survival Commission. And one of the benefits of that is that we are able to access some of the world's best conservationists. We are truly have converted ourselves into an international-based conservation organization. We are also able to take the strengths of what typically are zoo-based strengths in terms of our fundraising, our communications platforms, our ability to connect the public with conservation initiatives, and eventually here to change human behavior to benefit wildlife and wild places. We're able to take those things that we already know that zoos are very good at and connect them with the field conservationists that are in the field saving some of the most critically endangered species. So that has allowed us a level of credibility. It has also allowed us to be able to take our strengths, and which tend to be a little bit of the weaknesses of the Species Survival Commission, and align those two things together so that now we have access to any of the top conservation organizations and individuals around the world.
Whoa. I have a couple follow-up questions there, but I would just like to toss that before I jump in with my other questions to the rest of the panel for comments about how you've gained awareness around conservation, increasing impact, et cetera.
So maybe I'll jump in there and say how we haven't done it. So our organization is 70 years old, and for the first 65, we thought that doing the good work was enough. So we were sure that if we kept doing our good work, people would recognize it and then they would support us, and they did in a small way. But in the last probably 10, 15 years, we've realized that just doing the good work is not enough. You actually have to sell yourself, and you have to sell that good work. And building that profile is not easy, and it doesn't come naturally to us as conservationists and as scientists, because if we get 100 Rand from a donor, we want to spend 98 of that on the good work and 2 of it on the marketing. We don't want to spend 50-50. And it's almost as though we're being pushed into a system where we need to fundraise as much for the good work that we do as we do for the awareness raising of the good work that we do. So it's just a little bit of a challenge that we experience, and it's finding that balance, which I find quite tricky going forward. I mean, we're getting better at it slowly but surely, but I think it's certainly something that is worth discussing. So the Indianapolis model is a really interesting model where you've tied together the name of the city with the economic benefits and the conservation side. So I'm interested in the models that different companies or different groups are coming up with, because it's certainly something that I'm sure we're not the only ones that have struggled with this, doing good work versus selling the good work we're doing.
Thanks, Judy. Before we go on, I just want to take a quick break and ask Dario to introduce someone who's, I think, just joined us, another part of the Fundación Temaikèn family. Cecilia, I think, is in the room. Dario, you want to do a quick introduction there?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Kathy. So I'm Dario, and I'm the CEO and General Manager of Fundación Temaikèn. I'm here since 2018, and as Judy mentioned 5 minutes ago, Fundación Temaikèn is doing a fantastic job during the last 20 years, and now we are very close to our 20th anniversary in July the 20th, and we need to do more things in a good way. We need to improve our impact. We need to be more relevant, and for that reason, we are taking advantage of this webinar a lot.
Thank you. And I want to ask Cecilia, I'm sorry, I don't know your last name, but I believe you were instrumental in the founding of Fundación Temaikèn. If you'll say hi and raise a hand.
Hello, here I am. Cecilia Perez is my second name. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here and for the good work you have done. I want to follow up on a couple of the questions that Judy pulled out, and actually three things. One is the importance of placemaking, not just being place-based, but placemaking for your organization. And I will say I certainly knew about Indianapolis and some of the work you've done, but when the Indianapolis Prize was born, it made me think of you as a conservation organization. So, and the economic impact certainly is there. So for those of us with place-based organizations, how can we connect celebrities or identify them with our city or governing body officials? And second, or third maybe, is a comment maybe for Lynn Mento. I think you mentioned you have an award for emerging conservationists too, which can be hard to support, I think. You know, people haven't yet made a name for themselves. So a lot of questions there. How do we do placemaking? How do we identify the city and celebrities? And Lynn, how do we gain money to give money, maybe?
Were you directing all three of those at me, Kathy, or just the last one?
Anyone you want to tackle. We'll get to the rest of the panel, but it did remind me when she said it, when Karen said emerging conservationists.
Yeah. And I love that Indianapolis Prize. I think that is so brilliant. So hats off to you, Karen and Bill and your team for doing that. It's fantastic. So I would say, so as Conservation Nation, we are giving out grants, you could think of them as a prize, to both emerging and established conservationists from traditionally underrepresented groups within the conservation field. And so we are finding those folks, as you said, Kathy, they don't have names for themselves yet. And we're finding them through a process of getting the word out through the traditional grant application methods, and also friends and family, asking around who knows somebody at organizations who is just fantastic and needs a boost. And we conducted research where 80% of conservationists worked for free, and a half of them worked for free for over a year. Almost half of them had to take a second job to afford to stay in conservation. So that was part of the incentive for our prize grant to emerging conservationists, to give them that first critical paying job. Because once you get over that hurdle, things get a little bit easier. And so the idea was to find somebody who was volunteering within an organization and desperately wanted a paying job and wasn't able to get it. And we are funding folks that way. We have our first fellow that we funded, who we got her first paying job out at Yellowstone, the Yellowstone Wolf Project. And I think it's so critical. I think this next generation focus is so important. So I love your new emerging conservation prize. And I would say on the place-based thing, I have nothing brilliant at all to add, and probably nothing unique either, but we did one thing that you all may also have done. We partnered with our local children's hospital, and you may all have done the same thing, but it turned out to be a wonderful opportunity for us to bring the story of conservation and the uplifting photos of animals and the fun of animals to our local children's hospital. And it generated terrific PR for both the children's hospital and for the zoo. And that was a small investment in these big, beautiful photos that we blew up with sort of fun facts about the animals. And we put them all up and down the hallways of the zoo. And at Halloween, we created a little boo at the zoo on their rooftop garden for the kids to walk through. And at Christmas time, we had the panda there. So it was sort of a year-long focus, but for very little money, it had a wonderful impact and bang for the buck, and it helped cement together two sort of iconic Washington, D.C. organizations. But you all may be doing that anyways.
I'm kind of interested, who's working with their children's hospitals or regional health systems on any of this? That's great. We know of a couple of zoos that are, so that's a great suggestion. How about from the rest of the team, rest of the panel there?
I think we're in a bit of a slightly different position. So as the #1 tourist attraction in the state of New Mexico, we kind of already have a megaphone and people recognize us. we have a really loud voice for conservation, and it's been really important for us to figure out how we can amplify the voices of others and how we can collaborate to get kind of cohesive messaging to new audiences. So one of the things that we've done is opened up a collaboration with a local nursery called Jackalope. They have provided us with funding in support of a conservation plan that we have for the Sacramento checker spot butterfly, which is a critically endangered species of butterfly here in New Mexico. We'll actually be using some of that funding next week to do a collection for some ex situ rearing of that species in our facility. But the other half of it is just as important. We'll do talks at their nursery, so we kind of get a whole new audience of people who are interested in landscaping, but maybe haven't visited our garden. We have this really great way to work with them. Their beautiful pots are in our garden, and we have some signage that is branded with them that talks about how you can plant these species in your garden. And so it's great. It's a great way for them to advertise in our facility and provide some conservation funding. But more than that, it's a great way for us to reach a whole new audience that we didn't have access to before. And I would really encourage everyone to sort of reach out and look for some local partnerships like that one, even small ones, because I think the small ones really, really help to amplify your message, and they can form these really great mutually beneficial relationships.
Clay, just a quick question. How did you start developing? I mean, I've been to jackalope stores, and wildlife conservation wasn't the first thing I thought about. How did you make that connection?
Their owner actually reached out to us.
Yeah. I'd like to, let me jump in on that. I'd like to say, you know, normally it's us, right, that's out reaching out to everyone. And we've tried jackalope on a million different things, but they saw a story about the checker spotted butterfly. And at the time, we weren't doing work with them yet. So we kind of convinced them to do a bees and butterfly pollinator campaign with us. And now they're funding the checker spot because we now are involved. So that was an interesting thing. Rarely do we get to have people reach out to us. We're usually knocking on every door, but they came to us, and now they've committed to a multi-year campaign with us. And it's not, I mean, over years it'll be huge, but they started out at 25,000 and then it increases every year. And their goal is to get to be $100,000 donor on an annual basis. And they give us a percentage of sales from their store. So yeah, Kathy, you've been to Jackalope. It's not just garden and pots, there's furniture, and it's kind of an amazing and very cool place. But yeah, that was an exciting partnership. And as Clay was saying, I think, you know, between us going and presenting there and them coming to our gardens, we have sort of, it's a neat little kind of win-win, right, for both of us. But they have a big audience and we have a bigger audience. But I can't see that this can't do anything but grow bigger and become more and more important for us. So yeah, it's been maybe not as cool as the Indianapolis prize, which I totally want to steal that and do it. But it's certainly a great local way to get people to have an understanding of the impact of what they do. Julie, there's room for all of us. Get on in there. I'm there. I love it.
Yeah, and Albuquerque is a great city. So, and you have a great public-private partnership too, which I'd like to acknowledge. So very nice.
We do. Thank you.
Yeah. The one thing you mentioned, and actually it goes back to what Judy mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is the importance of self-promotion, you know, of talking about what we do, getting our stories out there. Because had Jackalope not even seen anything about your work in conservation, they wouldn't have known to pick up the phone or text or however they reached you. But by telling a good story, by telling compelling stories, then with great images, that as conservationists or educators, we often don't think about it. We're busy doing the work and, you know, selling our souls and trying to get people to love what we do, but we forget to talk about it boldly. Other examples of how we can get out there. I mean, I like the idea of having those images, you know, the kids and the animals, it's natural, your work with the pollinator species. Any other examples of how you have reached out that's paid off in surprising ways?
Are other folks doing a roundup for conservation at your facilities? that was very successful for us, and probably is for Indianapolis as well. So we, again, for very little money, hung signs throughout the zoo, any place where people were spending money, to give them the opportunity to round up their change for conservation. And our signs highlighted very specific conservation work that it would help fund. So, you know, a picture of a pangolin, for example, and that, you know, we raised, it was north of 100,000 every year for something that was literally money on the table, right? It was just something that we weren't scooping up before, that for just the price of signage and employee training and some system work, register system work, it was a nice sustainable program. And I think it opened people's eyes. Yes, they're buying, you know, a pair of sunglasses or a hot dog, but they are here at the zoo because of the work to save the pangolin, for example.
I'd like to hear from others, but one interesting twist on that I've heard from some other zoos is that they're allowing the concessions team, the people at the registers, the salespeople, even their partners, to have a say in spending that money. So they get a vote, they get to dedicate some to a conservation project that's close to them.
I love
So
that.
developing that, there's a payback for them to talk about the zoo's work or the aquarium's work or the garden's work. Other examples, that's a good one.
I mean, along with that, I think anytime, and we all know in our facilities, we all, you know, from everything from, like you said, collecting that way to the Plinko machines. I know that like Colorado Springs makes a killing on their conservation, their quarters for conservation. We're actually just starting this. We're making a bigger deal out of our conservation carousel, and all funds from the conservation carousel go to the conservation programs going on at our facility. I mean, those are all great internal things. And I think we all do probably a decent job internally of what we do. Probably the biggest issue really is getting it out there on a bigger scale, right? And I don't have any magic to talk about, but boy, I'm excited to hear some more ideas that you all have.
Anything else from the panel? And then I'm going to open that question to everybody else in the room.
I found that it's really important, and we kind of try to keep this in mind while we're doing the Assess, Plan, Act cycle, is that whenever you're speaking to anyone, funders, community, anyone, it's important to tell a complete story. And you really have to think about storytelling in this process. What we want is a complete conservation cycle of assessing, planning, and action. So we need to tell our audience about every one of those parts and how we're involved in all of it. And we find that that message really resonates with a lot of people, because we can say things like, we recognize the problem, we came up with a plan, we are involved in the solution, and there's a positive message in the end of this is where things are going in a positive way. And all too often I'll see a sign that says, you know, don't, that palm oil plantations are destroying the rainforest in Southeast Asia, but it doesn't follow up with what to do about it. And I think that a lot of facilities are really looking towards positive messaging in a much more cohesive and targeted way. But it's really important to bring storytelling into that, and to say that, you know, is the story we're telling about our programming complete? Does it have a beginning, a middle, and an end? And does it end in, you know, kind of the story arc that we want it to? If we think about the shape of stories, you know, is it moving in an upward trajectory at the end? And that's kind of something that we try to do when we structure any interaction with a donor, with a potential, you know, with one of our guests, anybody, is how can we have a whole story that includes the Assess, Plan, Act cycle?
I did invite everybody else in the room, but I can't help myself. I want to build off Clay's observation about storytelling, because it reminds me of a conversation Lynn Mento and some of the Temaikèn crew had early on a few months ago about the importance of storytelling. And I think, Lynn, you've actually used a storytelling consultant or coach or something.
Yeah.
You want to share some about that? And also, I'd invite any of the Temaikèn crew to open up about that.
Yeah, we did. And some of you may as well. But It's a firm, oh gosh, and of course, I can't remember the name, but I'm happy to send the contact information along. But it's a firm that specializes in telling stories. And she's sort of the woman who leads it is a strategic thinker, and it's terrific, because we all think we know our story, but it's wonderful to have someone from the outside to help listen to it all and help piece it together and push you in different ways around how you can tell your story better to various different audiences. So I found it helpful and happy to share the contact.
Great, yeah, and we will be sharing the recording of this session to everybody. And also, if you have resources that you'd like to suggest, please put that in the chat for us, and we'll be sure to share those. We'll do some takeaways from the session. How about Connie Paula from Temaikèn? Any observations on storytelling? I know you've been thinking a lot about that.
Thank you, Kathy. We are working on that very hard. We are trying to implement new strategies because we understood, and many of that knowledge that we have now is because of the work that we are doing with you, with David, and all the community that is helping us a lot. And we are thinking in different pieces in order to be more effective in the way that we tell our story. I think the main challenge here in Argentina is the position that Fundación Temaikèn has, because we are an NGO, a conservation NGO, that owns a zoo with a very strong zoological base in order to work in conservation. But here in our country is very different the way that NGOs work with organizations as ACA's facilities. I think we are the only organization with this model here. So it's very difficult because resources for conservation are more located in other kind of organizations. The biopark, the zoo is so big, is so important. We are a great zoo, and this is the part that people know. And so it's hard to tell them that all the conservation that we are doing is the main objective that we have for the zoo as well. I don't know, Connie, Dario, if you can help me if it's not clear what I try to say, but I think we have a big challenge here in order to work in zoo community with conservation.
Yeah, I think that can be a challenge. You're a large organization. Sometimes people look at you and other organizations and say, well, you have everything you need. What do you need? Our support. And it can be hard to get the word out. I want to look at one of the comments, and then we'll go for more questions from the audience. Hari says, do a lot of the conservationists use personal social media? And what are your policies about that? It would be interesting. There's a lot of buzz out there, TikTok, LinkedIn, all the social channels. What's everybody thinking about that? Or Hari, did you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah, I can kind of elaborate on what my thoughts were. First of all, hi guys, my name's Hari. So, social media is everywhere, right? And TikTok and LinkedIn are probably the biggest aggregators that really put you in front of different audiences nowadays. And zoos, everyone loves animals. But like the stories behind the conservation of the animals aren't really, I don't really see them that much. So I was wondering if, the zookeepers, maybe the wildlife conservationists, whoever is actually actively involved doing the work day to day is posting on TikTok or LinkedIn and showing the process behind that, becoming micro-influencers. And has anyone seen that work? Or because a lot of different other industries have seen the process behind it really boost up marketing, sales, and donations. So
open up. Others?
Just a really interesting observation that you've made in terms of almost taking the behind the scenes in front of the scenes and showing the stories from the keeper's side. And it's quite interesting for me, having worked at Sambra for so long, where I was somewhat draconian about our social media, to be honest, and really, really strict on what we put out there, and very, very careful about how we did it. And moving over to Oceans, where they're a lot freer and they're telling stories all the time, and just looking at the difference between the two approaches. And I think that there is a time and a place when you actually need to be a bit more strict and a bit more careful, because one bad story can ruin a lot of good work. But there is also a lot to be said for being more open and showing your successes, showing your failures, and engaging on a personal level. So I think that there is space for both, but certainly I'm seeing the value of individuals telling their stories as people first, and then as animals, or then about animals.
Thank you, Judy.
That's a great point.
You know, though, I feel compelled to say you need to be careful with those stories. They need to be curated. They need to be vetted. You have to also be cautious when you start mixing your institutional messaging with your personal social media, and how that could suddenly then you have an individual's personal beliefs and opinions being merged with your institutional beliefs and opinions. And that's part of the reason why social media, why you need to be very deliberate with it. But letting people see behind the curtain, which we don't always do, and letting them see the love and the passion and the genuine care and sacrifice that goes into the jobs our people do every day, I think is a great thing. But I would be very careful about using personal social media channels to get any of those institutional messages out.
And Kari, I'd add to that, having been in an institution that was, you couldn't post anything behind the scenes. And then they went through a media crisis and completely changed their tune very rapidly. Karen's guidance right there is absolutely right, but you know that comes in conflict with the whole concept of social media. So that authenticity, that unfakeness, all of that component is absolutely picked up, especially by younger audiences. And so I think that is that's probably a whole nother seminar, but that's a conflict that we're going to face as institutions, because we want control. We want to control the message. We want that guidance, that professionalism, that all of those components. And those are not what social media wants often. And that, I think that's the great conflict as we go through, because as we push towards more authenticity and making things real, you lose control. And that's I think the younger generation gets to grapple with that here the next few years, so figuring out how we do that and gain that the pros and cons of both of those sides, because there is absolutely strong pros and cons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of agree with what you're saying, Karen. One of the examples I would say is like Jay's Historic Reptiles. He's like in South Carolina, but he has like 3 million TikTok followers. And I'm sure any zoo could use another couple million followers, right? So, and that's what he does. He does like the behind the scenes and it's a lot of reptiles and crocodiles, but I just haven't seen a lot of zoos or other wildlife conservation organizations actually do that. So yeah, but thank you all for explaining.
Yeah. No, I understand the tension, and I'm wondering if anybody in the room has successfully walked that tightrope. I'm aware of zoos, I don't know if it's still true, but not too long ago, who actually forbade their keepers or aquarists from talking to the public. Don't, you're not supposed to engage. You might have the wrong message. For heaven's sakes, they're the rock stars. Anybody who walked that tightrope successfully?
I think, Kathy, we're all in the same boat, right? It's the fact that we're trying to control our message, and sometimes the process of getting the approval, we've already kind of missed the timing, and it loses that real-time freshness. So I think it's an issue across the board for everyone. And, social media, we all were really great originally on Facebook and Instagram, and now we're really trying to get in Twitter. now we're trying to get great on TikTok and LinkedIn. And, you know, I think a lot of us are behind on those, honestly. But again, the approval process just creates such a, you know, distraction, I guess, of getting things out on real time, because again, we do want to control our messaging. So I don't know, if someone ever figures that out, boy, spread the word. You might make a gazillion dollars too, selling the process. I don't know.
We'll work on that. David, what do you think? So sounds like a project. Smarter people than I need to figure that one out. Is there anything else on down this road? I think we need to look at ways that are immediate to share the joy that we have with a successful vet procedure, with an animal birth or a new acquisition immediately and personally, without jeopardizing, you know, sort of our name or our reputation in the wrong way. So it's worth talking about, worth thinking about. Other comments on that? Or Sarah, I see a hand.
Yeah, just a quick question if anyone, if we have time for it.
Sure.
Here at our zoo, we have a really good social media presence, and people love, you know, seeing the cute animal pictures and things like that. We get a lot of engagement, but our posts about our sustainability and conservation initiatives are just dismal, so much lower than things about animals. So I was wondering if you had any advice about how to make those projects initiatives seem more exciting, more fun for like the social media audience.
Big question. Let's toss that one out.
I'd say it's really important to emphasize engagement with the public and how they can actually participate. So if we see these messages of what we're doing, it doesn't often translate to we as a community. It translates we as an institution. And I think if you can get that message that people need to be involved, it's really helpful. And one thing that we've pushed really, really hard at our institution is engagement with community science programs. So we talk about how we're working on butterfly conservation programs and how the best thing that you can do to help us is get involved. And so part of that involves promotion of using things like iNaturalist. So if you can have something, the lowest barrier to entry possible, which is just download an app and take a picture in your backyard. And then we kind of step that up to the next level of, we run the New Mexico Butterfly Monitoring Network, where we have a series of volunteers collecting long-term data. And the barrier to entry of that is an hour-long training and, you know, a couple hours every couple of weeks throughout the summer. And then we move that up and say, if you want to help us with rare plant conservation programs, we have these monitoring initiatives that we would love to engage with individuals and businesses for. And I think that messaging of this conservation project involves you, the social media user who's consuming this, is really, really critical for getting engagement on these higher. It's not enough to just have a picture of an animal and say, we're working to save this. You have to get your audience involved.
And I want to jump onto what Clay just said too, Kathy, just really briefly. When you're asking maybe things to get people engaged, one of our kind of best successes has been when you do a did you know? So for example, we're doing work with fireflies, and most New Mexicans had no idea whatsoever that we have any fireflies in New Mexico, and there's 7 species. So that's been kind of a great one for us to talk to. And now we have people who are sending us, you know, emails and texts and whatever on a regular basis saying, hey, I actually saw fireflies. I didn't know that's what I saw. And so if you can get something that's surprising that can impact, or something new in your community, like fireflies, that's kind of a great lead in that's led us to talk about other things.
Julie, this is funny. My husband and I spent 2 hours Saturday night, well, this tells you about our social life, I guess, at a firefly festival by a lake in the woods with red covered flashlights, sitting on benches and sitting on the ground, watching fireflies, looking for synchronicity, looking for different kinds of fireflies.
That's
so
awesome.
Firefly Festival, South Jersey, there you go. I loved it because it forced me to focus. You know, I know a little bit about the beetles, but I don't know a lot, and it made me focus and pay attention. without my phone, which is important. I want to just double back a second to Clay. I loved your model of moving people. And I drew a pyramid in my head where you start with engagement here and you've got engagement and impact going up at increasing levels. So I think that's a great way to think about things. Start engagement down here and then build. I want to quickly move. We have about 10 or 15 minutes before we wrap up. And I want to go back to fundraising in particular. And we've identified a couple of what I would call kind of earned revenue related sources. We've talked about quarters for conservation tied maybe with your admission policies. We've talked about the rounding up, et cetera. We've talked a little bit about grant funding contributed support, but let's dive a little more deeply into the fundraising picture. What sources might you share that we might not have thought of, one thing, for grants or other kinds of contributed support? Let's start with that one. Eric.
Oh,
Eric? Yeah.
I want to just add a comment. It's to Julie's comment. I think you just nailed it. And Clay, it's how you tell the story. When we started our conservation projects, our development department said, well, we can do zebras and cheetahs, but how are we going to do hellbenders and American bearing beetles? And in the end, those they were the two largest conservation fundraising centers. So I think it's how we tell the story. It may not be on social media. I agree with a lot of what's been said, but I wouldn't underrate any species for the ability to raise funds.
Thanks, Eric. Good point. How we tell the story, and don't forget about the unloved animals there or plants. So let's move on to any specific ideas for where you've successfully, or where you think other people might successfully look for sources of support.
I mean, I'll just go back to what we talked about earlier too, is, you know, thinking of things like, I don't know, if you're talking about invertebrates or whatever, your garden centers, like, you know, kind of try to think differently of what might tie in to what you're doing. I mean, I think it's just basic, right? Fundraising 101, but conservation, you really do have to get people passionate and behind it as well. So, you know, that's a little bit harder, but also when you do, they have a tendency to stick around a lot longer because they're passionate about it. But as far as, you know, magic, someone please share something, because I would love to know. But
I know we're waiting for the answer.
Yeah, right. We want the magic place to go to.
Nobody wants to step up with magic because it isn't magic, but I will say that one of the mistakes that we make and have made is we don't think big enough and we don't think bold enough. And if you don't go big and if you don't go bold, you won't break out of doing sort of incremental projects. And there was a lot of risk with the Indianapolis prize, and it was audacious. And we came out of the box and we claimed to a space and a place that people looked at Indianapolis and said, really? And we did, and we got funders who had never supported that level of conservation engaged because it was bigger than something they had envisioned before. So that's not a magic formula and it's not for everyone, but my point is that sometimes we think smaller and we forget that what we're really doing is saving the world, and we all believe that. And sometimes we feel silly when we say that. But just be bold and take some risk.
I think that's good advice.
I think absolutely in an African context, conservation is a very low priority in many areas because we're competing with really, really serious people needs. So what we're doing now is really putting together the survival of species and people. So tying it together completely. So we very seldom will have a only species linked conservation program. We'll have one that includes people and that looks at the upliftment of people, job opportunities, perhaps helping sustainability of humans as well as nature. And that's certainly becoming essential in most of our conservation initiatives. So it's no longer just about the nature, it's about the people and nature. And that's certainly becoming more and more important. And Karen, I love your idea. We have to go big. We've been apologetic for a long time. And I really think that that's something to, yeah, shoot for the stars and see where we go.
And I'm thinking there are people in this room, we can help each other go big. And we know how the typical funding sources, foundations, et cetera, love collaborations. Global collaborations may be more challenging, but not necessarily. It's where a lot of the animals we work with live, and the plants. So I'm looking at Clay because he's a plant guy, so I don't want to leave the plants out of this, or the people, especially in today's landscape.
And that storytelling approach needs to involve your funders as well. So we have donors who have particular interests. They're interested in funding things. And on the plant side, can't stop talking about plants today. We have one donor in particular who's really interested in medicinal plants. And he funds part of our curandera garden. So when we had a medicinal plant symposium at our facility working on the medicinal plants of New Mexico and rare plants, we invited him to participate, to join us. He brought along his personal curandera, and she had incredible insight in a lot of these things, and it really enriched the conservation program that we had to have that sort of traditional knowledge incorporated into our conservation assessments. And having those people involved at every stage so that they can see the whole story progress and they can see everything come to fruition is really important. And I encourage you, no matter how small your donor, make sure that they're engaged in conservation, not just giving money, but also physically there and get their hands dirty and get them working with things. It's so helpful.
That's great advice. I'm looking at the clock now, and we have just 7 minutes left. And I really like to, and I see Danny has a comment about finding the celebrities within our organizations as well as outside. I'd like to encourage you all to kind of, talk among yourselves at conferences and online too, toss around ideas. We'll try to do something. Certainly we will post the results of this. We will post the recording and our own takeaways. We welcome your suggestions in the chat box. But now I'd like to, first of all, thank all of you for being here, but I'd like to ask our panel to, we're going to go around the room here and give us one closing thought, whether it's about gaining awareness, gaining new funding sources, telling your story, so whatever your closing thought might be. And I'll open it up to whoever wants to be bold enough to go first.
Well, I'll say something, Kathy. I think in the same vein as Karen and Judy about going big, I think we as biodiversity conservationists have to begin to much more tightly and inextricably link ourselves to climate change. So there are billions of dollars being spent on climate change, and thank God for it, right? We need every one of those dollars. But climate change and biodiversity loss are two sides of the same coin. And if money is not flowing to both, and I would argue both equally, then we'll end up with a planet that's cool enough to be habitable, but without the delicate web of biodiversity that allows our children and children to come to survive. So I think we need to focus on opening the eyes of these major climate change funders that it is the same coin, and biodiversity loss. If you believe in climate change, you must believe in funding and supporting the preservation of the web of biodiversity. And I think that's probably our biggest next challenge to really focus hard on.
Thank you. A perfect one. Okay, who's next?
I think I just want to echo what Lynn just said, because it's such an important concept. And and also contextualize it in the sense that climate change is no longer about reversing climate change, it's about adapting to climate change. And we need to really emphasize that message. And as institutions, we need to consider not just what animals and what ecosystems we are working to protect and help to adapt to climate change, but what communities we're helping to adapt to climate change. And so our conservation focus has been really has been directed almost entirely by our need to assist Indigenous communities in our area. So we've got 20 Pueblos, Navajo communities, and Mescalero communities. The Ute Mountain Ute communities to our north. We assist with as many conservation programs as we can on tribal lands because we recognize that they're going to be the hardest hit by climate change. Their biodiversity is going to be the hardest hit by climate change because of the geography of the situation. And that may look very different in wherever you are, but it's incredibly important to consider the communities that are impacted by climate change, not just the biodiversity.
It's a great observation, Clay. Thank you. Who's next?
I'll follow on next from Clay, because coming from Africa, my plea is that we take that the next step. So the country the continent that's probably most likely to be hit really badly with climate change and biodiversity loss is Africa and some of the other countries, continents, but we really are feeling the brunt of it now. When you talk to local community farmers, they're saying they can see changes in rainfall, they're feeling changes in their crops. So the brunt of climate change and biodiversity loss is going to be felt by the people, as we've always said, that can least afford it. So for zoos and aquariums around the world to build partnerships where your impact can have a massive change on the ground. So often a very small dollar in donation can make an incredible difference to somebody's life in a country like in one of the African countries. So that multiplier bang for your buck is really can be achieved with us. So I think it's looking at those partnerships, but then also looking at beyond handouts, looking at true partnerships. It might be nice to get the handouts to begin with, but in actual fact, what we need are true long-term partnerships. And I think that that's just a plea from an African context.
Terrific. Thank you, Judy. Who's next?
There you go, Kathy.
Thank you.
I fully agree with Judy. I think that we need to be bold, big, and global, because the issue is for all of us. And I think that we need to learn from you, from others, because the issue is huge. And we need to be together in order to be more relevant, not only to get more money, but also to share knowledge, best practices, in order to be more relevant in every part of the world. So I think that we are doing very good work here in Argentina, but we want to be more regional. We want to move outside Argentina, because I think that we have the facilities, we have the resources, we have the knowledge, we have the people in order to make more impact. So I think that we need to be bolder, bigger, and global.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up where we started. Let's go to Bill and then Karen. You can bring us home. Bill.
Well, I'll take a little bit of a zag. Since a majority of the folks on here are from zoological institutions, one of the reasons I was so excited about coming here to Indianapolis and starting the Global Center was to help bridge the gap between the conservation community and the perception of what zoos and aquariums do. And we still have a lot of work there. I'm going to give some props to our friends over in Albuquerque, because Albuquerque was one of the first centers of species survival. They do, Clay, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like 10% of the global assessments of many of the species that are done through the SSC are done by Albuquerque Biopark. And it is changing the definition of how conservationists, especially those field conservationists that have been skeptical about our types of institutions, it's changing their definition of what we do and why we do it. And although we have a long way to go, Fundación, Indianapolis Zoo, Albuquerque, all of these groups that are doing great conservation work and working with these international conservationists are changing that community to be more welcoming to us as partners in conservation rather than just simply donors to their field conservation efforts.
Good point. And let's have Karen. Thank you.
Thank you. And, Judy, you said something very early on that I think is key to this. We, those of us who are place-based and have an institution like a zoo, we have a tremendous amount of power to tap into, and changing people's minds and their hearts and ultimately their actions is going to be critical to us moving forward. And that's where our expertise is based, is dealing with the general public and investing in changing people's opinions and in building awareness, and how we do that and all the things we know about what is effective with people, including storytelling and not creating doomsday scenarios and tremendous guilt, all those things we've learned over time, and investing in that, investing in public relations and marketing to move our message forward. That is our mission. That's getting our mission done. That's not a divergence. That's not a sidetrack. That's how we change behavior. And if we don't get the individuals to embrace this and start making different decisions about how they vote, how they spend money, all of those things that we know, then none of what we do is going to ultimately be successful. So don't shy away from that and say, oh, gee, that doesn't feel quite clean to invest in celebrities and some of those kinds of things. It's how we get it done.
Great point, and it brings us home. I wanted to thank everybody for being here today. I'm going to ask Fundación Temaikèn staff to stay with us online in our panel. We have a few more comments to wrap up. And I want to thank our guests, our participants today, for really enriching the conversation. Go forth and make it happen. And thank you so much for your commitment to what we do to save the wild world. Have a great rest of the day, and thanks for joining us today.